Hello, my name is Yegor Batov, and welcome to the first ScandiPWA extensions workshop. Today we will take a look at the new extensibility functionality, and we will get acknowledged with basic concepts of how to do that, as well as we will implement some simple extension. Without further ado, let's get into it. First things first, what do we need to do? Our extension will provide the following functionality. Currently, in this component, the product card, there is a price displayed, some attributes, and the name of the product. What I want it to do as well is display SKU of that product. What do we need to do to implement such an extension? First of all, we need to make sure that we understand things right, and this is product card component. As we see here, it indeed is. First, we need to create a composer repository in which we will store our extension. I will not create a composer repository now because I don't need this sample extension to be installed elsewhere and to be pluggable, but for the real production extension, you need to do that as well. This directory replicates the simple composer repository. It has src folder, and inside that src folder, you need to have the following file structure for the front-end extension. You need to have a folder ScandiPWA, and inside of that, you need to have a directory called plugin. In this directory called plugin, we are going to define in which source member functions we are going to plug in order to change their behavior and append our logic somewhere in the application. First of all, we need to determine where do we need to plug in. I want our SKU to be displayed right under the product name. So we need to find a method that renders the product name and append our functionality to that method. Let's do it. Here I have a theme. It's a complete theme, not a PWA folder. It's called base theme, but actually it has the same contents as the source folder. For you, that will be the source folder. Let's search for product card. We see the product card component in here. Let's find where the name is rendered. We see that the name is rendered over here in main details section. What I want to do is after this block, insert my own block that would look something like this. Yeah, by implementing an extension. So I understand that I need to plug into this component that has this namespace. Alright, let's keep it there and let's go to our directory, plugin directory. We are going to create a new file here called product card plugin.js. Next, we are going to create class that will actually be our plugin. In this class, we are going to create member function that is going to wrap around this one and decide how this one is going to behave in the application. As it's written in the documentation, this function accepts three arguments. The first one is args, arguments that are passed here. As you see, no arguments are passed to this function. That's why this array will be empty if you don't have any other plugins that accept some arguments or pass some arguments here. Then we have callback argument. Callback in this case will be this method. If we had some other plugins around this one, then this callback, when called, would pipeline us down to the next plugin, and eventually chaining these callbacks and calling them in every plugin you write around the single function will eventually get you to that original member. And the third argument that we have here is instance. Instance here is instance of this class here. So actually it's that component itself. So what do we want to do? First of all, we want to get that running. To do that, we need to define the configuration for this plugin. For now, here in this function, I will put simple callback returning in order to have this logic running, not change. I will apply it to the context of that instance I'm acquiring here, and I will pass the args array. In this specific case, it's not essential to pass arguments here because it's an empty array, but it's strongly recommended to pass arguments even to functions that don't accept any. Maybe these arguments will be necessary for future plugins. Maybe some future plugin is changing this member function such way that it needs to accept something. And we, with the next step, instantiate this class here and get this function from there. Cool. Now let's define the configuration. And of course, as in every plugin, the configuration needs to be the default export. Here, we need to have our namespace, this one. Then we decide whether we plug this around class or instance. The member function we're wrapping this one around is available on the instance as just a simple class member. So we need to define this as a plugin on instance. Then we need to decide whether we want this to be get plugin or construct plugin. Construct plugins are available only on classes, but this one we define on instance, so we don't really have a choice here. All we need to do is write get here. We need to write the name of the member we are wrapping around. Render main details is it. This sequence denotes the sequence of plugins wrapped around this method. This object structure is the following. We have a position in here and we have an implementation. The position is a priority number. Its functionality is described in the document. I will not clarify it once again here because it's written there. We'll just write 100. And implementation is which function needs to be applied to this before it's called. Not before it's called, but you'll see later. Around render main details is the name of this function. So we have our config. That's great. Now let's actually activate this. To do that, we need to go to the source of our theme. In your case, it will be app design frontend ScandiPWA, and in this folder we have our configuration file. Currently it's extensions.json, but in the moment when you see this video, it may be called somewhat else. You should check that in the documentation that's provided in the description of this video. And in here you see that I have already one plugin activated, it's PayPal plugin. I need one more here. We'll write a name, that's just a sample plugin. And in here you need to put the path relative to Magento source folder to where this plugin file is located. This example extension directory is in local modules directory. You can see there. So I need to write the path relative to this src. That will be local modules, example extension, blah, blah, blah. Let's get in there. That'll ease the process. So relative to src, I need this. And I need the actual name of the file itself. Okay, great. We have this done. Now what I have to do is reload my frontend container in order for this JSON modification to get active. Let's do that. DCF is my alias for Docker Compose. I will show it to you as soon as this is finished. It's strongly recommended to use these aliases because they shorten the commands drastically. This is what DCF actually is. Great, let's check if our front end is ready. It's apparently not. We need to wait a bit. I'll get back to you when the compilation is complete. Alright, great. As you can see, our compilation has ended successfully. Let's check what do we see in this page. The same thing as we saw, expected behavior. Let's check if our plugin functions properly. Let's log something here. As you see, Webpack watches the changes that are applied even to the plugin files if they're connected properly and activated. Let's check the console once again. We see that our plugin says that it's working properly. Great! If we count this out, we won't call the callback and we won't actually return the thing that that callback is returning. In this exact case, the callback is this function here, and if we don't call that, that's essentially the same thing that's writing something like this. We're just removing it from the application logic. So expected behavior now is to see everything as it was, except the things that are rendered here. And we do. Great, that wasn't my initial target. Initial target was to render SKU. First of all, I need to get it from somewhere. Here, I know that SKU is in the product, in the props of this component. This component is an instance here. So to get this name here, I need to write the same thing, but not this props, but instance props. And to get SKU here, I need to put SKU in here. As easy as that. This SKU will be valid. And what do we want to actually return? What do we want rendered? We want something like this. We want to apply callback to the initial instance, and then we want our SKU compiled successfully. Great. The page gets reloaded and we see our SKUs here. Our target is achieved. And for now, the SKUs are shown here. I have showed you how to write plugins, how to wrap around the functions, how to write configuration file. So our goal is achieved. For now, you know how to write functions that wrap around these functions, how to configure your plugins, and how to interact with these arguments and what they're for. One thing that's also worth taking a look at is how to plug not only into the member functions of your components, but into some properties that are defined on the component. Let's create one here. For example, I'll create some maybe state. Yes. And here, for example, is active, and the initial value will be false. Great, and let's console log it here in order to make sure that it's actually present in our component. Yes, of course it is. And now with my extension, I want it not to be false when the component is first rendered, but to be true. How to achieve that? Let's play around with the plugin we have created already. What do we need to do in order to change this little thing? We need to define some member function in our plugin class. And this function will wrap around this property and it will return some value that will go instead of this property. How to do that? We create a function that's called the same way, state. And in this function, there'll be two arguments. the original member and the instance. Instance is the same thing that instance is here, and the original member is pretty obviously called because that's either modified by other plugins or unmodified this property. We need to return something from this function, and this something will be placed in our component instead of this state property. For example, if I return original member here, nothing will change. Let's take a look at how this works by connecting it through the configuration to our application. To wrap around this function, we need to define class construct plugin. Why class construct? Easily answered question, because that's the only kind of plugins we use to change properties of components. Then we need to provide the name of the thing we're wrapping the function around, and some position, and of course implementation. And the implementation will be this one. What do we see now? We see that nothing has changed, but if I don't return anything from here, our state will not be present here, will it? Of course not. And to change the state, add some new member to that, I will need to provide the destructured spread original member and some other property of the state that I need in my application. For example, is visible. Alright, let's take a look at how this works. Perfectly fine. And what if I, for example, need to replace this isActive false by isActive true? What if I want it to be true when I first come into my component? Let's just write it in here. And we'll see that this value has changed accordingly to the things we have done. Great, that's awesome.
And the last thing that we're gonna take a look at today is plugging into static properties. Imagine you have default props here and you want to add something else to this object. How to do that? First of all, we need to see this in the application. We could just do a simple console log here, but it won't work. Why won't it work? Well, it will show us the default props of that class, but our plugins will not be applied to this, because the middleware here is the function that proxies our classes and intercepts calls to their methods. Hence, without the middleware, we cannot do anything to the member functions. So we need to dump the default props not of the class itself, but of its middleware version. So pretty much it will look like this. Here we should see the same picture as we saw just now. Yes. Now let's write something that will change the default props. To do that, we need class get plugin. Class get plugins are used for the sole purpose, changing static properties of the classes. The syntax is really similar to this one. Essentially, it's the exact same thing. Let's implement this default props method in our plugin. This method will accept original member and instance inside of it, and the value it returns will be the new default props. And I want to keep the original ones intact, and for example, add one more to it, having property name and value Yegor. What do we see here? We see that we successfully changed the property, the static property of our component. The same way you can change not only default props, but also prop types if you need that, and etc, etc, etc. Pretty much this is everything I wanted to show you today. Thank you for your attention, have a nice day, and remember to comment this video with any ideas on the future guides, any your demands. Take care and goodbye.